Welcome to Create Street's event, Green Places, Green Lives. We've got an amazing panel, very broad, very dynamic panel for us today. I'd like to thank all the speakers and overall panelists for joining us today. Before we delve into the world of urban greenery, I'd like to thank Delancey for sponsoring this event, for helping us make this happen. I think we're quite keen to hear from the sharp ends, what's happening, how they can kind of wrap some of the ambitions of not just the work that we're doing and also some of the panelists are doing, and how we can do that through development of 1.5 million new homes, which we've just been announced we're going to target. My name's David Milner. I'm not Rose Grayston, which might, some of you sharp-eyed may have picked up on. So I'm the Deputy Director of Create Streets. Rose is unable to join us, but hopefully I'll try and take us along. We had a very big panel, and now we just have a big panel, so I'll try and sort of keep us vaguely on time. So urban greenery and greening up, as we call it. Nothing could be more timely, I think, following in particular the Labour leader's speech, focus on something we're really pleased to hear, the focus on gentle urban development, which we would call and have been calling gentle density for a long time. Seeking to achieve a quantum jump, not just in the houses built, but also the amount of greenery that we experience and that people experience, particularly in poorer neighbourhoods. The report that we launched, Greening Up, was looking to really sort of set a quantum jump and a quantum step in the amount of urban greenery, really to try and look at all the different factors, both push, pull, all the blockers, as to why areas like Grimsby have 2.8% tree canopy cover, compared to Woking and Guildford, up at the sort of high 20s, some of them even 30s. We know access to urban greenery, trees and plants varies widely across communities. As I just said, many of the private communities don't have as good access. And sort of, I don't, and I think we don't believe that you should have to get the bus, get the train, or drive to experience greenery. I don't believe you should have to make an appointment to experience greenery in your lives. We want everyone to experience that in their daily business. So with that, I'd like to introduce the panel. We've got quite a lineup. So firstly, I'm going to go from right to left. Councillor community co-design event we were running when you weren't leader, but I think you were still councillor at that point. I'm not just saying this to beat him up, but I am slightly. He very much kind of listened to our presentation and then sort of started getting very involved in the urban design and layouts and saying, why is the front door, why is the front garden not fronting onto this public park, which is one of our sort of key principles. So I was like, he's actually listening, this is great. And that was with, I think it was a community land trust, so affordable housing in Greenwich at that time. And I know that you've sort of been you are playing a pivotal role on new homes in your borough. We've also got Councillor Jane Scullion, another leader of Calderdale Council. I was doing a bit of digging on you earlier and found that you were inspired by the Boxing Day floods to get involved in borough politics. And I expect that's probably some of the reason why you're very interested in sustainable drainage. I think it's important we talk about not just street trees, but sustainable drainage and sort of greenery within the streets as well. On my left is Karen Liebreich, who set up and runs Abundance London. So you're actually doing this and doing the greening up. They do absolutely transformational work in greening up local pockets of cities. I'm lucky enough to experience some of the greening up that Karen does. It certainly makes my commute a lot better. To Karen's left, we have Stafford, Lancaster, Chief Investment Officer at Delancey, who are front line of developing places. I'm particularly interested, with respect to the new towns and new towns and city extensions, beautiful city extensions that Scullion was talking about, how we can, what role you're going to play in this, and in particular with the greening up agenda. And then finally, not least, John Burke, decarbonisation lead at Gloucester Council, former councillor at Hackney as well, where you did some incredible work planting, I don't know how many thousand trees, was it 5,000, maybe even more?
5,000.
5,000.
I mean, there was also 1,000 in the parks.
Okay.
What's 10,000?
Yeah, exactly. Planting lots of street trees in Hackney, and not just street trees, but looking at how else can you impact for the better the climate emergency. And if you're on Twitter, you probably come across John as well. Right, so that's our introductions. I think because we've got such a big panel, what I'd like to do is turn to specific panel members to talk about the question on our sort of journey through urban greenery. So the first person I'm going to speak to is John, who's jumping in a bit unknown. So one of the most striking findings about the approach to screening and report is that our deprived places tend to experience less urban greenery and far fewer trees, 40% fewer than rich spaces, according to a 2016 survey. So I'd sort of like you to set the scene, and then we'll turn to Councillor Scullion afterwards. What are the particular benefits of urban greenery for deprived places, and why should we make this a focus?
Okay, so I think that's a brilliant question, and I think the first thing I would say to people in local government is, the kind of extant position on urban greenery and green infrastructure has been something that's nice to have. It's been a kind of aesthetics first approach when it comes to the delivery of this kind of infrastructure. That's related to the kind of wide-scale benefits of urban green infrastructure has exploded. I mean, there is some studies going back 20, 30 years, but I think over the last 5 or 6 years, this has really accelerated. I mean, if we take a look at the negative social phenomena that afflicts the poorest communities, those communities defined as most deprived by social human deprivation index, we're talking about crime, antisocial behaviour, health inequalities and poor public health outcomes, and also exposure to the increasing number, intensity, strength of extreme weather events, and particularly in our urban environments, that's extreme heat events and the urban heat island effect. So, some of I think the remarkable data that has come out of some more recent studies into the impacts of urban green infrastructure are things such as, we can directly correlate, adjusted for all of the factors, including the human deprivation index, we can directly correlate the number or the percentage of local prescriptions for antidepressants with the overall number quantum of percentage of on-street canopy cover within a particular neighbourhood. That's even when you adjust for all of the factors. We know, for example, that again, adjusted for all of the factors, where you've got a controlled neighbourhood and a neighbourhood that's recently received a high degree of 10-year canopy cover investment. In those studies, we know that green infrastructure can have a marked impact on the reduction in street crime, both violent and a sexual nature, and property crime as well. And one of the reasons academics posit for this is that by creating a more luxurious green and public realm, we tend to increase the number of eyes on the street, or Jane Jacobs' famous as we call the eyes on the street. We increase the quantum of the street ballet, and as a consequence to do, and therefore it's reducing the significant impacts of crime on those deprived communities. And if we take a look at things like extreme heat events, we know, for example, that respiratory illness is disproportionately found amongst deprived communities, and we know that for every 1 degree above 23 degrees as we head into an extreme heat event, the percentage of the over 65 with respiratory illnesses who present to hospitals increases by 10% for every additional degree over 23 degrees. So we know then that we can provide those health benefits to those more deprived communities, but it has a wider cascading effect. So, for example, you're then reducing pressure on health services during an extreme heat event, so that those individuals who require more urgent attention are also presented to the hospitals. I think I've demonstrated that we need an urgent beyond aesthetics approach to green infrastructure, and also, which I think David's was pointing towards, the elimination of hard standing in our cities as well, which acts as a huge storage heater, magnifying and amplifying extreme heat events in particular, but also surface water flooding during high precipitation events as well. And the final point that I would make is that the more deprived communities tend to be communities, people will know that I have a minor interest in surface transport decarbonisation. And one of the things that I think is really important is that we begin to think about the ecology of surface transport decarbonisation as a complementary feature of green infrastructure investment as well. So I think Clyde Lokes, for example, I was talking to a councillor from you before about the great work that Clyde has undertaken in Waltham Forest, and I think what's unique about those kind of filters that they've delivered as part of their mini homes and low traffic neighbourhoods, is that they tend to be characterised by repaving, playfulness, street tree canopy cover. They're not just making places better by reducing through traffic and surface transport emissions, improving air quality, reducing road danger. They're also then beautifying the public realm and achieving those wider set of public health, environment and social benefits.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Perfectly on 5 minutes, I was expecting to have to come in and rein you back on your stats, but absolutely nailed that, and with no notes as well to go through a lot of those stats. I think it's incredible. So with crime, mental health, climate, impacts on respiratory illness, reducing asphalt, digging up the roads where you can, and then the impact on surface transport. So that's a good sort of start for 10, I think, on urban benefits. I'd like to turn to Councillor Scullion as well, if you've got a few more benefits you'd like to share.
Thank you. I wanted to start by getting you as the audience to remember something that you've all seen, which is post-war housing estates in Britain. And listening to Keir Starmer talking about the marvellous housing we're going to have in the future, I think there are lessons to be learned from what we did about the post-war housing in Britain. If you've ever actually tried to plant things in many of the green spaces that are on our housing estates, you realise that often the rubble from the building was just stuck on there and the grass over the top. If you ever tried to plant crocuses each year, as I do, on an estate, you realise that actually there's a lot to be gained in terms of breaking up those very, very unattractive swathes of green spaces. And one of the first attractions for us in Calderdale, and I don't want the South and the Midlands to get all of the story about heat waves. Actually, in the North we've been suffering recently from A, cold, and B, extreme weather events in terms of rainfall. Calderdale is one of the most frequently flooded boroughs in the country. And we are really, I'm sadly very interested in sustainable urban drainage and surface water management. You'll have seen what happened in Scotland last week in terms of the sheer amount of water that's coming down. Trees really work. They really, really work. And they work in terms of not just providing a canopy for shade when there are heat waves, but they also help to slow the flow. And that's a big mantra that we have in Calderdale, home of slow the flow, in terms of reducing the speed at which water comes down. Makes enormous difference to us. So I would say that surface water management is one of the reasons why we need to make sure that we actually are planting lots and lots of trees. In our local, oops, something went bang. Right, oh, carry on. Is it safe? For you. We just got our local plan through as a borough, and we've really focused on sustainable urban drainage and water management because we see the future in climate change, and managing surface water is going to be something for all of us really to concentrate on. The second reason why we should be planting more trees touches on what John said, and it's about a sense of place. If you think about all the lost and neglected bits of corners of land that local authorities and the other public sector bodies have, actually, we're not looking after a place, and we're not giving people the opportunity to have that pride in place, sense of ownership of place. All those lost and neglected bits of land. In Calderdale, we have just mapped those and put them into a map for the public in terms of community right to grow. And very interesting to see what people have taken up. I'm very keen on guerrilla gardening as well, but community right to grow actually means that our spaces, our public realm spaces, actually get the kind of attention, the greening and the tree planting that they need. So those two things, surface water management and sense of pride in place that we really need to have in terms of developing our communities and our homes of the future, I think are real reason for planting more trees. And also in the marvellous Greening Up report that David mentioned, there are two marvellous pictures of Hebden Bridge, which is in Calderdale.
And I was in one of them. Thank you so much. That was fantastic. Yeah, slowing the flow. That's a great phrase, and obviously pride in place, and the community right to grow, which is something we're looking at, a right to plant, and how can we sort of roll this out? Because I don't think it's right to just sort of leave it for councils or developers. Actually, how can we get the I was in Woodland Trust talk actually this morning, and there's so much energy and desire to get planting. So let's just make it easier. Brilliant. So we've heard a lot about the benefits. I'm going to turn now to how this fits into housing regen for those in the room who are looking to build housing. On the panel especially, if the Labour Party does form the next government, it's going to have a lot on its plate. I've been to so many events hearing about different sort of tensions, people wanting different resources, different acts and bills being passed. Why should greenery be a priority? We have heard a little bit about that, but maybe if you've got anything to add on that, Stafford. And clearly, trees and urban planting is nice. How can it help Labour and the government, if it is in power, achieve its policy goals for housing and regen and improving health outcomes?
Thanks, David. Yeah, I'll try and answer that. I mean, by way of background, introductory background, we invest in residential commercial assets around London and across the UK, and are fortunate to be immersed in some very large-scale projects, notably Earl's Court regeneration, the Olympic Park post-games regeneration, Elephant and Castle Town Centre and the Newmaker Yards in Salford. So these are large-scale projects where this is a very relevant issue. Our activity in these areas is enabled by an extensive relationship with large global investors who entrust us with their UK investment, real estate investment strategies. We're a UK-only business. But improving greenery and biodiversity is a really important part of all our developments, and we actually have a commitment to do so through our own sort of responsible investment strategies. It's also a requirement of our investors, so it's a natural alignment. It's a deep-rooted commitment from us as well. So we come at this from that perspective. We're big advocates of the work that Create Streets do, and proud to support today. And I think the Greening Up report, which I think you've all got, if you haven't seen it already, a summary of, is well positioned, and funding is noted in it as a barrier to greening up, both in delivery and in long-term stewardship. I think it's very important to differentiate, but to include both in that conversation. I'm going to come at this today from the perspective of private capital. That's just obviously because of my background I've described. And I guess as the only private sector voice on the panel, I hope I can sort of add some insights into how and why we approach greening up the way we do, and hopefully it will align with other colleagues on the panel to give us a holistic view of the issue. For private capital investment, I mean, in the end, you've got to make decisions based on returns for your clients' money. We've got a fiduciary duty to do so, and this requires choices to be made and priorities to be ordered. But I think the good news, in my view, is that biodiversity and greening up is quite obviously not in conflict with delivering financial returns. As the report highlights, places that people enjoy living, working in are more valuable. So there is an inherent alignment there. But also returns aren't just about pounds and pence. They're through property development, you can generate reputational, social, environmental value, things that are important to ourselves and to our clients. So again, there's alignment there. And if you can get the social and environmental value right, then the economics again become enhanced. It's virtuous, I think. It's also clear that delivering housing-led regeneration that embraces nature at heart has got to be in line with a policy objective around positive health outcomes and well-being. You touched on this a minute ago. Not only in a physical sense, but in a mental one. People enjoying nature will be less isolated and lonely. If people are happy living and working in our districts, they're more likely to stay, and long-term asset performance is enhanced. So to give you a couple of examples of what we're up to, a very live example at the moment is Earl's Court. There's a couple of colleagues over there who lead the project. I help in part. But it's a 40-acre development in central London. It will deliver 4,000 homes, 15,000 jobs. It's where the exhibition centres used to be. The master plan is being prepared to prioritise open and green spaces. It's working within a public realm inclusion panel to bring forward an inclusive and accessible approach to the landscaping. We're going to be planting over 1,000 trees, not as many, but we're getting there.
I mean, it's not all about numbers, are they?
Coming seconds, but also looking at how the urban planting can improve air quality. It's a big air quality issue in that part of London. form spaces people want to be in, and create a development which is diverse and responsive to the climate change. And sustainability is running through everything there, from design to development to construction, as you probably imagine it would, through introducing nature, boosting biodiversity. 60% of the site will be actually unbuilt, maximising the opportunity for green space and nature to thrive. The second example I want to give you is the former Athletes Village from London 2012, now known as East Village, which regenerated a major brownfield site in an economically disadvantaged. Not like us. These things can happen. Rarely, but they can, particularly when you've got such a deadline, etc. But the project really did ensure that the loss of baseline biodiversity was fully mitigated and significant biodiversity gains were delivered. And we took over custodianship of the village post-games, post-delivery, which I think brings me on to what's happened. So in the last 10 years, since the Olympics, the ecological monitoring that we do has found that all habitats have been broadly successful. And some quick stats here that I think are interesting. Generally up to around 70%, I have to read these, unlike my colleague here. Generally up to around 70% of planted or sown species remain in most habitats that were created. The flowering swards are clearly diverse and successful, and with careful ongoing management, species richness is only likely to increase. On the ground, almost 600 species of invertebrate were found. 5% nationally rare or scarce, and one truly rare species, the malachite, the CH beetle. Much of the development was designed with green roofs, and they're very well used by bees, butterflies, and create brilliant food for pollinators. 140 species of invertebrates found, 5% being nationally rare or scarce, and not the same species as at ground level. And East Village has its own honey, which is delicious. We should have brought some, sorry, next time. But the landscape plans for East Village have been found to be very successful, and it makes for a much more pleasant place for residents and visitors to enjoy, as well as the homes, the residential, the commercial space. So again, it is virtuous to have that wonderful amenity alongside the properties. The upfront is very much ongoing investment in biodiversity landscaping. It wasn't just good for the environment, it makes for a more attractive place to live, work and play. It contributes to our property assets there, securing more tenants and buyers for their homes and better rents on the commercial properties. But it's not to forget the ongoing investment post-delivery that's required to nurture and enhance the landscape, and the operational costs run into millions of pounds a year. And I think that's important when we think about these factors, when we're considering long-term viability. I think referencing some of the historic housing developments and the management of those failing because of a lack of management and investment. I think it's also important to distinguish between development and long-term investment. The former can be short-term, amazing endeavour, but the latter is critical if the initial investment's to be fully realised and enjoyed. So the Labour Party has a lot on its plate. We just heard from Keir Starmer some big ambitions for new sustainable new towns and to accelerate planning policy. And as such, I think greening up naturally has to be part of the strategy. I can't see why it can't be, and it's obviously referenced very specifically. But the question remains, well, how do you deliver it? I mean, the Olympics, I would say, is an unusual situation, not the norm. I think in that context, it was government-backed. It was essential. The project would have been impossible just for the private sector to carry out alone. Being designed, maybe a new bargain between public, private, communities, comes an element of carrot as well as stick in that process to encourage even over-investment into designing greenery into these new developments. And there's clearly a massive benefit for everybody, local authorities, communities, private capital. But not everything can be done at a national level, and there are local authorities on this panel that are already leading the way on greening up. with no government support. So I think a lot of ambitions put forward, which at the moment, can be delivered also at local level with communities and the local authorities and private capital working together with a win for everybody. So I hope these are difficult things. It's a lot about personalities, it's about actually making things want to happen, but I think it's there to be done, and we have done it a few times. So if greening up's entirely aligned to policy objectives, how can it be delivered? I've got a couple of ideas which maybe we'll talk about, but one is perhaps prioritising the delivery of this within planning game packages, but something's got to give around viability and choices will need to be made. So there's something in that which needs a conversation. Embrace the partnership, as I've talked about. Incentivise delivery of these things, perhaps with fast-track planning. I think there's something noted there in the announcement today, we'll see. Possibly financial incentives, enhanced write-downs, for example, to support costs of delivery and long-term custodianship. There may be something in that. And also, I always try to find his road. At Earls Court, we're supported by Homes England with an infrastructure funding support for huge infrastructure we have to do. So why not include greening up as an infrastructure investment and include within that the ability for the government through Homes England and other agencies to bring in funding support to help this partnership and to help, you know, the delivery of these major initiatives. But thank you.
Thank you so much. Resisting the urge when you to combine invertebrates to sort of talk about any that might be coming under the English Ocean at the moment. But on communities and community planting, I think we've sort of heard a lot about planning, we've heard a lot about policy. You know, how can we do this now, and who's doing this now? I sort of don't know too many better than Karen in Abundance London, so I think sort of looking to you to talk to everyone in the room really about you know, what can everyone here, what can we do now to make it easier to plant and maintain more trees and plants?
So Abundance London is, we're all volunteers, we're local. There was in the borough, so I'm in Hounslow Borough, and I should be careful because I can see some Hounslow people in the audience. Services were contracted out, so the parks went one way and the libraries went another way. Streets went another way, and some of them are big PFIs, 25-year PFIs. And in between that, lots of little bits of land fell between the cracks. So the people who got the libraries and the leisure centres didn't think that there were also some green bits in front of there. And there were also little corners on the streets that in the olden days the gardener would have just done, and now it wasn't on anyone's list, so nobody did it. And these little patches were where we started gardening and greening up. I feel your pain with the crocuses and the rubble, and all I can say is pickaxes. And I'm also very excited to hear that your trees are surviving, because I would say that planting trees is not the issue, surviving trees is the issue. And you tell me you've planted 38,000 trees or whatever it was that was planted along HS2, which we're not mentioning, and you know, loads of them have died, most of them have died. And I mean, just on the train coming up here, I had an email from a resident in, not your development, in South.
She says that to all the developers.
I say worse things. So I mean, this development. So a resident has said, you know, all the trees were planted and they're all dying, and I've tried to reach the ones I can with a hose from the bottom of my garden, and the rest are dying. And I've rung the number, the information number, and it doesn't answer. I also rang the information answer, and it just says we don't take phone calls, email in, and I've emailed in, and nobody's answered. And one of the councillors has emailed, this is Ealing, has have to plant, presumably it's a statutory planning condition that they plant, you know, 40 trees or whatever. And the answer you get then when you say, well, they're dying, is doesn't matter, we can plant some more next year. And those contracts, I think, are usually 3 years, and we can plant new ones every year if we can be bothered, if somebody tells us. So it's not just developers. Delancey obviously accepted. TfL planted 20 trees along the A4, and 19 and a half are dead. And when you ring them, they say it's summer dormancy. We're now in the second year of summer dormancy, and they say it doesn't matter because we'll replant. So that's absolutely pointless. I mean, they've wasted 20 good trees and the amount of time that the workers planted them, and they look like shit, and it's pointless. You need to have survived trees, not planted trees. So I would say watering new trees is really important, and to a certain extent, if you've got a dying tree in front of your house, you can try and bring in the council, or you could go out with a bucket and start watering it. And one of the things Abundance did was go around and put little signs on all the new trees during COVID, and said, if you want to adopt this tree, email us. And we ended up with 85 tree waterers looking after 125 new trees in our area, and I think we had a 6% death rate. So that's just somebody sort of getting off her button and saying, let's do it, and then inspiring local people to actually take ownership. And you can sit there and go, well, it's the council. Litter-filled corner and a dead tree. So, and people need empowering to have permission. I mean, quite often people will contact me now and say, do you think I could green that? There's a raised bed and it's all full of litter, can I green it? And I give them permission. I'm nobody. I mean, I'm not of any council. I'm just a local shit stirrer. So I say, go for it.
What did you think the leaders of local councils are?
So I think it's a question of empowering people and saying, do it. You want to plant some bulbs there, do it. I mean, is anyone really going to prosecute you for planting bulbs? Maybe they will for planting, if you start planting maybe oak trees in local parks, not such a good idea. So I would say the small scale stuff you can go ahead and do. But to be honest, don't tell anybody. And obviously I'm sure there's no press here, but I mean, we guerrilla gardened 12 trees down the A4 after TfL said they were going to, and then didn't. And so we did, and the next year they did some. And we had Duke of Edinburgh kids watering them, and I said, I'm not signing your Duke of Edinburgh certificate if the tree dies. And one of them died, and I don't blame the Duke of Edinburgh, and I did sign. So I would say, yes, that's about trees. I would encourage those of you who are council leaders or have authority to brief your workers, and that's got to be briefed down to the lowest worker, the one who's actually coming and mowing off the wildflowers that some people have guerrilla gardened, because you should be encouraging these initiatives. It should be a partnership between the council and the local residents. And if some of the local residents have gone on, planted some daffodils off just when it's about to flower. So you need to instruct your workers, and that's not just the foreman who may be enthusiastic, but the actual guys who are coming around with a strimmer to do it. In our council, we've got a new no glyphosate rule. So we've got lots of plants growing in our newly rewilded pavements. And sometimes they're nice plants. And it would be nice if they could make a difference between the little erigeron daisies and the horrible docks and stuff, and could actually use their initiative. So I would say brief your workers, don't spray off the tree pit, don't hoe off the tree pit, don't hoe off if it's actually something that looks like it might be a flower. Maybe educate your workers so they know the difference between a flower and a weed, but between a dock and a cosmos, and let them have a bit of initiative. If they come past and take out a whole tree pit of this high cosmos buzzing with bees, and they say, well, sorry, love, but we've been told we have to weed everything along here, maybe give them room for a bit of initiative there. So linked to that is don't patronise local residents. Obviously, those of you in councils will know that a large percentage of your local residents are very annoying, but there are those who are actually intelligent, well-meaning, thoughtful, and willing to put in some work. And these are you can't afford that many workers, so use your residents who would like to have more beautiful areas and encourage them. Give them little grants to plant bulbs or to do whatever. Even £100 goes a long way to greening up a little nasty corner. And don't treat them like idiots. You might be the idiot. Sorry. But basically treat them as partners, not as the enemy. And then for those of us who are just local residents, I would say be empowered and do it. If you've been looking at a little bit that's been annoying you and wondering who it belongs, who you need to ask for permission, you can ask for permission, but sometimes it will take you a year or two to get permission, and it is always easier for an official to say no, because because they're frightened of the insurance or what will you do? And sometimes it's better to ask for forgiveness rather than permission.
Thank you. Quite the setup to Anthony now, so I'm going to call him the local council leader, not use your words at this point. It's fine. There's the challenge in a way, Anthony. How are you doing sort of in Greenwich? What are your residents doing? How are you sort of helping them get there, get stuck in, watering and planting right now?
Brilliant. First of all, just start by thanking everyone for coming, because I think this is such a needed discourse and such a needed debate. And I'm really grateful for the report that we see before us today. I was reading the report, and the foreword is by the CEO of Berkeley Homes, Rob Perrings. And in reading it, I thought to myself of Cllr, which is in Greenwich, which is a whole new area that has recently been generated. And there's been such a commitment to thinking about biodiversity, open space, and how housing relates. It's talked about everywhere. The level of biodiversity, the level of planting in the area is just wonderful. It's such an area that people don't just live there, people also want to come there. And I don't live there, but I do visit myself. But then it also got me thinking about Cllr as a new area that's recently been developed through regeneration. And when we think about greening, can we really rely on the fact that areas that are newly regenerated have the benefits of greening and biodiversity, whereas others might not? Which then strikes the question about what are we missing? And what we're missing is that we're creating a system whereby there is an invisible inequality for those who have access to green space and greening and those that don't. And then the question becomes, can we really rely on our public health? Can we really rely on the great things that greening does to be done in a piecemeal way, whereby it's either relying on a project or an enthusiastic community group or a passionate individual? And I don't think it can, especially if we want to tackle inequality and invisible inequalities. So thus, I guess the question is, what do we need to make sure we think about a whole system approach? Barriers that are put in place. I remember prior to becoming a leader, I was a cabinet member for housing in Greenwich, and a small group of community came to me and said they wanted to work on this patch of land and put some green space. I thought, absolutely fantastic, isn't this wonderful? Then I took that to my officers, and the response was, oh, it's HRA land. Need to do a risk assessment.
Welcome to my world.
And then we need to do a community engagement, and just a whole load of barriers. Really important barriers though, right? Things that actually does need to be resolved. But in working with this community, there was just constant pushback, because no one had the time, no one had the energy, and no one had the effort to think about how do we work around that green space, and how do we support our residents to be able to deliver their aspirations for that green space, which made me think that the council didn't have the capacity to manage such things. And in the end, the community went ahead and did it. And then there was even more pushback because they put something toxic in the ground, which didn't help the aspirations of the project. And I just remember when it was all happening, there was this ping of officers pushing responsibility to each other. And ultimately, that cannot be the outlook for greening in our country, because it is so vitally important, because we're trying to tackle those invisible inequalities. We don't want to live in a world where we have the tale of two cities. We want everyone to have access to green space. So one of the things we did was put in place, or we hired a project manager who can help bring together different departments within the council to put that work in. We have to, as authority, think about how we support our communities to change their areas. But more widely, I do think that one of the great things the report talks about is like targets and targets for areas. And I thus do think that's an important way of thinking about, in our geographics of our areas that we live in, how do we make sure we uplift biodiversity? Now, obviously, in planning regulations, you have biodiversity 3.0, which relates to new development. But what about areas that aren't getting developed recently? What about streets? You know, we recently developed a huge project in Plumstead where we're reinvesting into the high street. And if you come to the area, you see some of that sustainable drainage and pathways where you have wonderful urban greening. But then when the insurance runs out in 2 years' time, where does the maintenance come in? You know, when you speak to the points about trees dying, that's a huge problem. Actually, in many councils, we don't want certain greening to be in place because it's a maintenance cost to it. It brings more challenges. When you put forward planning applications and areas in there has greenings that isn't covered by service charge, we perhaps don't really want it because there is a maintenance cost to it. And these are the barriers, and thus we need to set targets. Help think about our geographical areas and help think about how our local plans deliver for new developments, but also have a strategy for areas that aren't necessarily being delivered. And also we need to think about funding. But in the meantime, while we don't have funding, because there has been a huge cut in the level of investment that goes in HRA housing lands, because if you do anything there, that has a knock-on impact on the service charges for your social tenants. And a huge level of investment that's needed in highways land, which we have seen cut to the bone. Another thing we need to do is think about how we work with other partners like Network Rail, TfL, other authorities who may have land that can interject or collaborate with in areas that you have land, and also how we work with developers. But in the meantime, while we don't have that level of funding that we want to see, and hopefully we get from the incoming Labour government, we do need to think about ownership and responsibility, because the responsibility is on all of us to make sure our areas are fantastic, lovely places that promote our health. So to that point about adopting a tree, whilst it may seem like a small idea, it's actually a really big idea, because it brings in what we call community ownership to an area, using our communities to make sure that they take ownership for the areas they live in. Thank you.
I really like that idea of you described it as almost like a delivery unit for tree planting, which is a sort of another theme that we've heard quite a lot actually, I think, over the past few days, and making it easier for groups like yours to actually not spend as much time filling in paperwork and more time actually planting. Right, so I think we've kept you waiting. Oh, wow, there we go. I think we've kept you waiting long enough. It's been about 40 minutes. I think what we're going to do, we've got a roaming mic, so we're going to come and do some questions to the panel. I think probably if we do 15 minutes or so. I appreciate you've sort of been waiting a little while, but we'll just run over. There's no one afterwards. And then we might just come back to the panel for 1 minute straight sort of closing remarks. So I'd like to kind of open the questions to urban greenery, green lives, but also anything else that you think. John touched on a few different points around how we can create more sustainable places in general. Right, should we start from the back lady in red?
Hello, I'm Sarah Courtney from Calderdale CLP. It wasn't a question, it's just a courtesy thing. Docks aren't necessarily weeds. We have someone here who nearly won the dock pudding championship of Great Britain.
I apologise.
Okay, I'm going to take one more as well. Dogs aren't weeds, I've written it down. Let's keep it easy for you, Lauren, and lady in the pink.
Hi, I'm Jane Watson, I'm an architect. So there was lots of talk that government, parliament and local government have enough built environment expertise to make sure that these places are actually the sustainable, aspirational places that we want.
Brilliant. I want to take one more. I've got to go chap at the front because you were sort of you were up there before I even raised my arms.
Thank you. Martin Rathfeld, Manchester Gorton. The other end of this sort of guerrilla gardening and stuff, which sounds wonderful, my neighbours are very keen on concreting over their gardens. Do you think they should require planning permission to do that?
So I think I might go to Stafford. I'm going to go to you on Jane's very good question on is there enough expertise, and then I think Anthony, I might come to you on the planning permission, just to keep it nice and interesting for you on front gardens and just to emphasise docks aren't weeds. So we'll start with that. So yes, question: have we got enough expertise basically to deliver 1.5 million sustainable homes?
The amount of expertise, and that's clear right the way through the system. Starting with planning and development control. Others can talk to this more knowledge than me, but from my perspective, the amount of resource isn't there. That isn't going to be fixed overnight. Budgets are massively constrained, and that's again where I do think this partnership piece does come in massively. But it's got to be a new deal. It's got to be a new construct. I think somebody mentioned the PFI word earlier, and those sorts of things didn't work. Too misaligned. It's got to be a different way of doing it, but it needs partnership. There isn't the level of resource, in my opinion, and there won't be for the foreseeable. It's not just going to appear. It's not only it's training, it's cost, it's everything. Partnership.
Any other? Yeah.
Just on the resource, I think horticultural resource as well. I think, in the old days we used to train, you used to do an apprenticeship at the park, and you used to learn horticulture from the ground up, and we don't have that anymore. And the horticulture, whatever you want to call it, has changed a lot as well. So in the old days it would have been bedding plants, and now it's stocks and other more sustainable things. And if I look at my park squares, a lot of them are older, and also there's not many of them. And I don't see the younger generation coming through. So I think horticulturally there's also the skills there.
Brilliant, thank you. I think just sort of Chair's prerogative as well on the points on the resources. It's going to depend a lot, I think, on where we've decided to build these new places. Are these a lot of people talk about brownfield, but brownfield can be an airfield in the middle of wherever, home counties. It can be an urban extension, and particular attention we'd like to see some focus on is how you integrate not just the housing but also the movement infrastructure, the transport. How can we have these places that are easier to sort of walk around, easier to pop to the shops and whatever? And I think that's Martin, your question on guerrilla gardening and planning permission for paving over front drives.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I wouldn't want it to be included in planning because then I have to do all the enforcement on that, and I can tell you I'm busy on enforcement on something else. However, I do think there is an education piece here about how we change attitudes, especially when it comes to hard sanding and pavements and people doing all of that stuff outside their house. Now, if you look at the way we used to do planning before, it hasn't really ever really promoted, I wouldn't say it hasn't ever, but if you look at that American-styled kind of system whereby everything's concrete and you drive towards your shopping centre, that's been a part of our planning history. Now, with the fact that there is a target for biodiversity net gain, and with all the discourse that's happening, there is a shift to really entrench biodiversity in everything we do. So I think councils need to help, and governments and developers need to set out for their areas how they change areas, but also how they take communities with them, and do that education piece at the same time about the importance of why it's important not to just put asphalt or put bitumen down on your pavements and what that does to the environment. But there's also an education piece as well at the schooling level, because we're trying to change a generation. We're trying to change a generation not just from outside your house, but your driving habits. and your sustainable living habits, and that takes a while. So I think if you go to the point where you just do a straight ban, I can assure you, you won't get the enforcement because we just don't have the capacity or to the point of resources, and thus we need to think about that education piece to help deal with it.
Brilliant. Right, we've got time for some.
Sorry, I'd like to at all. I mean, I think you know, I recognise the point that were made about enforcement. I think that's an argument to resource enforcement in local authorities rather than to not have to resource enforcement at all in the first place. The Royal Horticultural Society's Green and Grey Britain report, I think it was about 2016, 2017, found that between 2010 and 2015 alone, a further 3.5 million front and back gardens were paved over in the UK, bringing the total at that point to around 7 million. I think in the subsequent 5-10 years, I think we were all in this room, if we'd been aware of what's happening in our cities, seen that accelerate further. And I think it's an absolutely scary number of front gardens that have now been entirely paved over. And I've shown some examples of that close to where my grandparents live in the suburbs, were 5 or 6 years ago fairly green. Now it's a complete wasteland. I think there's a major issue affecting other people externalising the cost of their lifestyle choices to others. Now, we don't do that when it comes to passive smoking, because we've decided quite rightly that it's not right for somebody who smokes to blow their smoke in somebody else's faces, although we do let people with SUVs do it. We'll talk about that another time, right? But so you know, when it comes to the issue of overpaving, and not just overpaving, the use of astroturf, for example, which is releasing a cocktail of volatile organic compounds, which are very powerful greenhouse gases, but also impact on human health and can disrupt human endocrine systems, etc., etc. We're allowing people to make decisions which are ostensibly about their garden, right, front or back. But that have wider implications. If your choice to overpave your front or back garden places your neighbours at greater risk of surface water flooding, then we cannot duty, I think, to take a look at that. You know, it's my personal view. I'm a natural banner of things, real curmudgeon, right? And the kind of the Cromwellian element of me says, you know, we need to be very muscular, we need to ban these things. But if we're not going to do that, then we need things like a price signal, a market price signal, and that's where the Association of British Insurers need to start getting involved in this. Because I think if you do decide to place your neighbours at risk by overpaving your front and your back garden, or you know, impact insect populations which pollinate our crops and feed us, right? If you do decide to make that decision out of self-interest, right, then insuring your property should be far, far, far more expensive, and the revenue generated from that should be going back into repairing the properties of your neighbours that are flooded next time it rains heavily. I did say it wasn't quite too sure.
It was illuminating. I think, yeah, education, not enforcement, planting was a big take-up. There's definitely a challenge around EVs and how we deal with the charging on this. And then I think how do we combat the externalities is a really important point to come. So, right, some more questions. I think if Ed, you've got the speak, so if we sort of start from the back and then work down to 3 questions.
Thank you very much. I'm really glad to hear someone say.
What was your name, sir?
Sorry, my name's Scott. I'm also from Calderdale. James, my boss.
Congratulations! Congratulations!
Sadly not first, so yeah.
We can't believe politicians anytime.
Exactly. You said it. I'm really glad someone mentioned about seeking forgiveness and not permission, because where we're from is the birthplace of the incredible edible movement. I'm sure some of you are aware of that. But that's not what I want to speak about. I think what I want to speak about is, and we know, and great to hear from Karen, and brilliant that volunteer groups are taking up some of the slack here. But we know that volunteer groups are vulnerable in the sense that someone could move away, someone, you know, actually they need that capacity to keep that continuum going on. What I want to speak about, though, is invasive species. And that is the big variable, really, because we can do as much as we can as volunteers, but we need that hand-holding when it comes to the threat of things like Himalayan balsam and, you know, Japanese knotweed, some of these things that we do need to have really strong partnerships with other people to make sure that we're on top of it. So I'm just wondering what your reflections are on that, which is going to be yeah, you can make an argument that they're great for biodiversity and stuff, and they are, you know, but equally they're a threat to making sure things like insurance are kept on top
Thank you.
of.
So invasive species. If we take go to the chap in the jacket shirt.
Hi, my name is John Morris. I'm a councillor in the London Borough and a Deputy Cabinet Member for Highways and Sustainable Transport. So Anthony's contribution spoke to our experiences in Newham, where in the East Village, it really is a great combination of the natural and urban environment. But in my ward, which was built up after the war, we got post-war estates, and it obviously didn't think about incorporating nature, like there's barely any tree trees, for example. However, what I would disagree with is the idea of community ownership and community groups taking over, because in community groups apply for funding for planters and parklets, and they're quite successful, but for a whole range of reasons, short-term tenancies, community groups last for a couple of years. They are temporary, whereas the state will always exist. Government in one form or another will always exist. So I guess my question...
So I get the gist of the question. So around relying on community groups, and also what do you do with that
Well,
community?
actually, what's the long-term financial solution? Because there is a revenue cost.
Brilliant, thank you. Got that. Right, let's do one more at the front, chap in the shirt.
Hi there, Kieran Gallagher from Cycling UK. We heard Keir Starmer talk about long-term planning. Unfortunately, we have reports that Louis Hay may be talking about more subsidies for driving in her upcoming speech. If that is true, how do we convince the Labour frontbench that, especially in the context of building 1.5 million new homes, that prioritising one form of transport over all others is not going to solve a short-term problem, let alone long-term ones?
Brilliant, thank you. Nice succinct question as well. So I think I might go for Karen on invasive species, if that's okay, and then Jane, I'll turn to you on community capacity, long-term implications. Then Stafford, if you're interested to take the point on transport, I'm just sort of interested how you're dealing with this, potentially in Eltcourt and some of the big developments, and then I'm sure other members will want to chip in. Karen, so yeah, invasive species.
Yeah, we don't plant Himalayan balsam or Japanese knotweed, and I strongly discourage people from planting things like cordyline in tree pits and stupid stuff. Could do a list of things that they don't want, which would probably be quicker than doing a list of things they do want. But I think, yes, it does. I mean, it would be stupid to be planting those. And small groups can't deal with something like Japanese knotweed, they can't deal with. I'm not a great believer in planters and parklets because, for those reasons, actually, they're high maintenance, they're temporary. And yes, I mean, I agree. I hope that my group would be sustainable if I fall under one of the new buses that's going to come in, or an SUV or whatever. It's a short term, and it makes me feel better because I can't solve the rainforest in Brazil or whatever, but I can solve some issues that are close to me. But ideally, we would fund our public realm, our greening properly, and it would be done properly and not depend on people like me doing it. Meanwhile, I do it.
Thank you, brilliant. Jane, can I turn to you? I think it's a really interesting question on capacity, and yeah, it's certainly something that Credit Streets we've come across, both projects we do and also with our charity. The groups that have long-term funding or support, or there's a long-term point of contact, you can sort of keep that virtuous cycle going much more. So yeah, very interested to hear your views on how you keep that going.
Thank you. And it relates to the point that Anthony was touching on earlier about assets, in the sense that these are all assets or structures or natural things that have to be maintained into the future. And absolutely take that point. We have begun to think about a future world in which the local authority does not have money, does not have hegemony, and actually we need to think about, in terms of governance and power, how you give some of those things to other bodies, other structures, other people. And one of the things that we're looking at in terms of our local plan and in terms of our 2 new garden communities that we're developing at the moment is stewardship. Instead of the local authority owning particular things in the new developments, sort of forest areas, all kinds of things, riparian benefits that people have. Actually, we are going to develop a trust, and that will be a stewardship trust, and there are very long-standing precedents for this. But we're also working very hard with other bodies, because we do see a future in which some of that ownership and management of assets into the future is more diffuse. And that's why existing long-standing structures for governance, like stewardship trusts, like community land trusts, for example, I think give us an idea in terms of the future in which local authority is going to be owning and doing everything, in which ownership and governance for the longer term has to be thought about. It has to be thought about in a way which is more about distributed power within the community.
Brilliant, thank you so much. I just want to tackle, I think, Kieran, your final question, and then what I might do is just go to the panel for a final 1 minute summary on places. I also, just before I do turn to you, Stafford, I've been told that more wine is going to be coming apparently afterwards. I saw some like nervous faces out there, but yeah, apparently more wine is going to be coming straight when we finish. So that's just an incentive. Louise Hay, some of her comments, Labour's position on transport, how we will move around. How are you seeking to sort of tackle that, or what are your views on that for your developments?
Yeah, I mean, I can only speak from the sort of design and planning thing, really not the political thing, of course, but maybe others can think that. But I think it is pretty obvious, I guess, things have changed massively around how we're designing around transport. Obviously, depends on specifics. Certainly in London, there's been over 10 years of complete revolution in terms of car parking provision in some projects. So these village in the first phase, we have 3,000 homes with 1,500 car parking spaces and 2 apartments. And the utilisation has been, well, it started off low and it built up. So it sort of shows you if you deliver them, people use them. But actually phases 2 and 3, which are 1,000 homes in total, have no parking other than Liebreich, disabled and stuff like that. So actually when you've got the transport, I mean, you and Stafford in particular, some amazing transport connections, public transport connections. You don't need parking at Earls Court. We acquired the site off a previous developer who's building very high-end housing with concreted undercroft full of parking. We've ditched that plan and we've got no parking. In Salford, we have parking. So, it's an issue of the local transport, although it's got better, to be honest, within central Manchester and Salford, but there is a parking out. So it's sort of a little bit, it depends on obviously what the options are. But the big move from us, and I think most of our sort of contemporaries, is around car-free development, certainly in urban, well-serviced areas. I'm not sure that's necessarily.
Thank you so much. So, conscious of time, 4:14, I'm going to go from that side of the panel across for sort of 1 minute, thought summary. Please try and keep to 1 minute on green places, green lives. John, take it away.
I mean, there's a lot that we could spend all night on about these things, and it's absolutely fascinating. I think I'm just going to counter through some of the things that I think are relevant coming out of this. I don't think local authorities can wait around for any government current or incoming to come and save them and resolve these problems. I think that, yes, grants, direct government grant is an issue, but as we demonstrated in Hackney, you can use, if you're willing to have a joined up policy whereby you have a parking revenue account, whereby you appropriately charge those drivers who are not observing the rules of the road. You can then reinvest that parking revenue account funding back into urban green infrastructure because it's considered legitimate spend, and that's hugely important that local authorities think about the mechanisms through which they can raise revenue to achieve this locally. Yes, revenue funding is a huge challenge here, but local authorities need to change their perspective on this and need to think about maintaining the urban canopy in the way that they would any other form of infrastructure. And I've demonstrated, I think, cogently today that actually it's probably a far better investment than many of the other hard infrastructure projects that we engage in as local authorities. A final point I'd make on invasive species is, particularly in the case of London, there's 15,000 kilometres of road in London. The overwhelming majority of it's given over to the parking of private vehicles owned by other people. In fact, cars are the most powerful invasive species. They look harder than greening of our urban space. I don't think we're suggesting that we should eradicate that today, but we can and we must eliminate a huge amount of our superfluous private motor vehicle use, and in doing so will free up vast amounts of land for regreening our cities and enhancing the lives of their residents.
Thanks. I'd just like to thank the panel today and also for everybody coming here today. I thought we were slightly the graveyard slot after the main speech, but thanks. Great for you to all come along, so thank you. I think for me, as I said to you, I think there are some real aligned points as to how, in partnership, things can be delivered in a very comprehensive way of bigger projects. It can be more difficult on individual projects, I think, individual buildings, but on bigger projects for sure. And we took a few ideas there around how we prioritise the delivery of greening, maybe make it more infrastructure, like planning gain, all that sort of stuff. I think there's also a really interesting point about accessibility of things, and I do agree. It's we're trying to create accessible open projects, and obviously the wider Olympic Park is an even bigger area. But in the end, again, it's about partnership. You can only do so much, and if we can all link together, I do think that's a very good point. But yeah, that's me.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Well, I think this was very useful to see different approaches. So to see, a developer, council, where all the different angles are coming from, but also to keep driving forward. I think, the biodiversity crisis, air pollution crisis, climate change crisis is really urgent. And I think we need to drive it forward. We need to, what John said about cars and things like, ULEZ or putting in cycle lanes, we shouldn't go backwards from these. We have to drive further forwards, and I think it's very urgent. And I would like to thank Create Streets for this huge piece of work, to you for funding it, because I think it's a really good report. So it's, the little booklet is just the summary, but it's a big fact book.
We'll sort of give some of those out, and it's all online as well.
And they're online on PDF, and it's really intelligent and well done. And there are different things that someone like me can do, somebody like council people can do, and if we ever get decent government and have a minister for greening up, it would be great to go forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Karen. Jane.
I hesitate to use the term levelling up at a Labour Party conference, given that it has become slightly debased as a currency at the current time. But I would say that levelling up has to include access to nature, but also access to greener streets for all the reasons that people have talked about here today. So concept of levelling up, actually a great concept. It's got to include the things that we've talked about, the things that the planners like to call blue and green infrastructure. We deserve them, people deserve them, and they will make our country a better place at a time of climate change.
Thank you.
I think there's some really long-term and short-term things we can be doing in this space. But to speak to the short-term, I think I see a deputy leader of Lambeth councils in the room, and look to their transport strategy and things that they're doing to urban green their areas. I think that's really good. Those points about asking your council about what direction of travel they are going in and getting them to commit to uplifting their areas by doing urban greening and what's their target. I would ask you to do that as well. Get people in that can help bring people together to do this work. The simple task of appointing a project manager to help lead and support community groups in the midst of a time where there's a housing crisis and adult social care crisis, and we don't have the long-term funding that we need. A small project manager can help do a lot to help achieve these things. Thank you.
Right, I think one wine is imminent. So, so over to me. I know. So over to me. I think there's too much here to summarise, which is why we can hand out an exec summary which does it all for you. So some of the key takeaways for me, I think, the case for greenery seems to be, just so robust. We've got case from people, the planet, place, how this improves, everything from mental health, physical health, the air you breathe, how much flooding you have in your area, through to how much people like to walk or cycle if you have an enjoyable route. So I feel most people who are here are probably convinced by that. I think we've been told to get on and do it by Karen, and I would reach out to her actually, and if you're thinking of setting something like this up, we've already started to think about putting you in touch with some of our groups. I think it's really important that the new developments in these 1.5 million homes really embeds principles where we've got capital resources to sort of bake good greenery in from the start. But also on the existing place, and our existing streets are they're going to be the majority, with the number of millions of homes we have in our existing country. So actually, how you support communities for the long term is going to be important. And I think maybe just wrapping up, that we value trees. Yes, there is a cost to this, but there's a huge value, and it's not just. So I think we should do that. So I want to thank the panel. It's been absolutely fascinating. I've really enjoyed this. Thank you for letting me step in place of Rose. You had no choice. I'd like to thank Delancey for supporting this in particular. We couldn't sort of bring this to the fore without their support. And thank you to yourselves.